to the New Wilmington Missionary Conference in 1957, and Don McClure was here on furlough and spoke at the conference, and he challenged us, as I was in college at the time, challenged us to consider giving a year of voluntary service in Ethiopia. And I began to try to learn something about the country, and then the following year, in 1958, I did go for a one-year volunteer stint and lived with Don and Lida among the Anuaks. I dropped out of Pitt for 1 year and then came back and finished up my final 2 years there. But in coming back, I knew that if possible, I wanted to go back to Ethiopia. We both went to Beverly Heights, and we were both hired to work on the summer staff in 1960, and of course you're never supposed to date somebody else on the staff. By the second date, I'd fallen in love with her, and I knew that she was going to Ethiopia with me. She didn't know that yet, but God and I did.
And one of the things, when you live in a place like Ethiopia and have a grass-roofed house and no running water and no, just a pit toilet and a wood stove, keeping the household running is just a huge thing. Raising the kids was also a real challenge. I mean, it was fun. We loved living there. They grew up multiculturally. They grew up learning 3 languages at one time. But one of the things which I had the privilege of doing was homeschooling the kids before it was in style. We always had plenty to eat, but we didn't always have plenty of diversity. So, you know, 100 ways to fix chicken, or how to make whatever bird your husband dragged in for Thanksgiving taste like turkey. You know, a lot of sage goes a long way. Yeah, the Anuaks constantly had their hands in our kids' little straight blonde hairs, you know, and sometimes the kids used to get annoyed, and then finally they just gave up being annoyed. And the women would try to braid my hair, and they'd say, "Oh, Pat, we can't do a thing with it. Your hair is just like a goat's hair."
Well, the purpose of the project was to plant a church among the Anuaks that would still survive after the missionaries had left. And so my job was to try to devise a school system that would enhance the church planting efforts of the people who were doing the evangelism. And that was how we got into what we ended up calling development education, because we were trying to figure out what is the likely direction that the development process is going to go in southwestern Ethiopia, and how can we prepare Christian Anuaks to fit into that and to be in the leadership positions.
I would sit and teach reading to the women in their own language. They'd never read anything in their own language, and we'd be reading primers. And it would be, God is present on earth, God is present in heaven, God is good. And when they got to that place, they would always read, God is bad, because in their mind there were so many bad things that happened in life that they blamed in God. And one of the real breakthroughs is when these women learned enough about God and about what Christ had done for them to read, God is good.
One young fellow came as a refugee, an orphan from Sudan, Oquir, and he sort of grew up in our home. He would bring fish to Pat every day, and she would invite him for dinner, of course, and that was basically how he survived. He's now a pastor. Another fellow who was Oquir was the youth leader, really, and another fellow, Pool, who was part of his group, is now also a pastor.
But then it's interesting to see that these Anuak Christians have gone out and they have witnessed to the next door tribe, the Masungos, up in the mountains.
We thought we were going to spend 40 years in Ethiopia. With the revolution that occurred in 1974, God changed the direction of our lives. That was when we made the switch and came back. And then I served on the staff here at Beverly Heights for 3.5 years and began to realize there was this tremendous number of internationals who were studying here. We weren't going to go back to Ethiopia, but I still felt that God was calling me to a career in cross-cultural mission, and began to realize that here probably was the venue for doing that. And of course that's what happened, and that's why PRISM was started in 1980.
Lots of times we will host international students in our home, And that really is one of the wonderful outreaches of the PRISM ministry. In churches all over Pittsburgh, there are people that are agreeing to host people in their homes on a one-time basis, or even to sign up to sponsor someone for a year or for the 3-year term that they're in the country, and to contact them once a month and do something with them. After the Christmas Eve service at Belfield, we've traditionally had a reception for them, because they have nowhere to go at Christmas. We all have our families and our celebrations.
Many of them are Christians, so we try to help them grow in their faith so that when they go back home, they'll be stronger leaders in their churches and in their nations. Many of them are not Christians, but open to the gospel and really searching for a new model for their own personal lives and perhaps for their nations. 90% of the internationals at Pitt and CMU are graduate level or postdocs, so they don't live in dormitories like the undergrads would. So they move into unfurnished apartments, and they've come here with 2 suitcases, so they sleep on the floor and they eat on the floor, and these are very sophisticated, highly educated people. And local churches provide us with the things for setting up a household for these folks, and we give them away generally on the last Saturday of August. And that's how we make the initial contact with them, but because you have to earn the right to be able to share the gospel with people. And the heart of our work in PRISM, as it was in Ethiopia, is the gospel. We are intent in sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with people who don't know Christ. And we do this by trying to figure out how can we earn that right. And we do it by the garage giveaway, we do it by hosting, we do it by trips to Washington, D.C. and Niagara Falls. We do it by Bible studies. And because we are interested in sharing the gospel of Christ with anyone who is willing to listen. There was a man who came here a few years ago with a PhD from Japan in chemistry, and he said he thought he would, when he got this PhD, he thought he would be fulfilled, and he wasn't, so he came for postdoctoral things. And he found his fulfillment in faith in Jesus Christ. A fellow from West Africa came one time. And one night he came to me and he said, I'm going to be going back home. And I said, oh, did you finish your PhD? He said, oh, I already had one. I said, well, why did you come to Pitt for a PhD? He said, I was searching for truth and I've found it, and now I'm ready to go home. One man who was here from Tanzania went back. He became a member of Parliament.
Well, our Tanzanian friend invited us to come back with the summer service group from the New Wilmington Missionary Conference because he was so impressed with the conference. So we took 6 young women and Betsy with us and visited Tanzania, spent our whole summer there doing a work study under this member of Parliament.
And this has just been our church home, and we're grateful for all of the people who have been such a wonderful blessing to us.
Beverly Heights was supportive in sending Carl out that year as a volunteer. He probably would never have gone if they hadn't sort of picked up on his invitation and said, we'll pay your way over, for you to be able to do this. And they have stood behind us and met our needs throughout the years, as we both spiritual needs and physical needs during the years that we were in ministry there and in PRISM.
Yeah, we grew up here, we heard the gospel here, we did our first teaching of the gospel here. We started dating while we were working on the staff here. We were married here. All 3 of our children have been baptized here. I was ordained here, worked on the staff, and just this tremendous relationship with the people of Beverly Heights. Beverly Heights has just been part of our whole family's life.
There's one thing we'd like to say, to anyone who's seeing and listening, is that it's one thing to read about missions, and it's one thing to contribute your money to missions, but to actually be able to get out there, if you ever get the chance to do that, and your life will never be the same, because you will see a kind of a challenge that God has that you can't possibly see when you're sitting in the comfort of your own home and your own home church and your own community.
To have been a missionary for 40 years has been the most exciting possible career I could have ever thought of having. And I think the crucial thing is once you commit your life into God's hands and say, okay, take over and do with me what you want to, and that's what we tried to do with our lives. God leads you into these tremendous challenges and as Pat said, provides for you, but it was exciting and it went fast, and I could not have reprogrammed it in any way that would have been more wonderful.